Good morning. I want to welcome you to the 7th of 8 succession planning webinars that the Ohio Employee Ownership Center at Kent State University is putting on this spring and early summer. Today's session is a topical one, I think. There's a lot of talk around the succession planning world about selling your business to an outside buyer and whether that's kind of now is the good time to do that. What kind of strategy do you want to go through to if you're looking to do that in today's economy, what you can do about that. And as Andy said in his preface remarks, feel free to jump in at any time and ask questions. I'm going to be asking a few questions. I have some that I need answered as well. But today's speaker is Andy, I want to make sure I pronounce the last name, Sathi?
That's right.
Andy Sathi from the Malibu Group. It's a firm based here in Ohio. They do a lot of succession planning, estate planning type stuff, and so we're very pleased to have Andy here today. I almost prevented Andy from showing up in today's webinar, but fortunately, I got my act together, so we're glad to have Andy here, and I think with that, I'll turn it right over to you.
Great. Thanks, Chris. Well, just to give everyone a little bit of an introduction, the Malibu Group is the name came from the fact that our founding partner went to graduate school at Pepperdine in Malibu, California. We actually do not have any offices in California. We are headquartered in Cincinnati. And we are a mergers and acquisitions advisory firm working predominantly with companies that have $5 to $10 million or more in revenues to help them either buy other businesses or to sell their business and to do all the strategic work that that's involved in helping them to sell their business. My name again is Andy Sathi. I have been with the firm for 3 years and I've been involved in a number of lower middle market transactions, and so we'll be drawing on some of that as we go through this presentation. And just as an FYI, in the mergers and acquisitions advisory world, like in a lot of worlds, we tend to use a whole lot of jargon, and so please feel free to jump in and call me on it if I'm using a term that's unfamiliar to you, because there's a whole bunch of them and it's easy to get lost. But if we go, let's see, I'll go to the next slide and get started. Okay. Here we go. Basically, most M&A processes for transactions that are going to be under $200 million, which is what we call in our world the lower middle market, are going to be very, very similar. Transactions above that may have some differences, but I believe for the most part for this audience that the process that I'm outlining should be relevant. And this is most discussions that you'll hear about M&A processes will tend to focus on steps 3 through 5, marketing, execution, and closing. But I think in a lot of cases the problems come into play when there's not enough attention paid to steps 1 and 2, the planning and the preparation phase. So I'm probably going to spend most of my time talking about those 2 phases, but then also spend some time outlining the marketing and the execution and the closing phase, just to bring up a few things that may be of interest to you. And as I said, you can always jump in with questions. So we go to the next slide. This is just a general statistic as to why the benefit of planning for selling your business to a third party. Less than 40% of business owners actually successfully transition their business, and the reason they give is because they're not properly planning for that event. And as you can see, only 9% of business owners have a formal written plan. The key in that next statement, that only 1 in 10 business owners receive a price for their business anywhere close to what they want or expect, is the word expect. In a lot of cases in the planning phases, there is very little attention given to what is the expectation of an owner when they go out to sell their business. A good advisor, and whether that's an M&A advisor or an accountant or whoever is there that can be helpful to you, should be there to help you assess your strategy and to appropriately set your expectations. There's a possibility also that the execution is poor, but I'd say probably 8 out of 10 times when an owner receives a price that is less than what they expect, it probably has as much to do with their expectations as it does with anything else. In general, what we see a lot is that business owners tend to have a sense of what they want and a sense of what they think their business is worth, but that sense hasn't really been tested against what's going on in the market or an outside third party coming in and saying to them, these are some of the reasons why your business is worth what it is. So getting those expectations right is a very, very important part of the planning process and one that gets overlooked a whole lot. And we'll get into some examples of that as we move forward. Let's see, so next slide. Very important in the beginning, what is the objective that you want to accomplish from the sale? And what I've outlined here are just 4 examples, and there are many, many different possibilities, but some of the 4 most common examples that we see are just simply maximizing cash, finding a partner to help you grow your business, removing liability. We're seeing a lot more of those types of sales right now, and then simply exiting the involvement in the business altogether. Quick story, we worked with a client in the electrical equipment distribution space a few years ago. His goal was simply to maximize the amount of money that he could get from the transaction. He didn't care about the growth of the business. He just wanted to maximize the value that he got from the company and to get out. In a case like that, the buyers that we're going to be going to are a little bit different from a case where a business owner is looking for a partner to really help them grow. So the strategy becomes a little bit different, but it's very, very clear, very, very important to make sure that the objective is clear in your mind as to why you want to sell the business. In another instance, we helped sell a business in the oilfield services space back in October. And our client's goal in that particular case was very, very different. He wanted a partner to help him grow his business because there was a whole lot of money that needed to be spent to get to where he wanted to go, and he was at a point where he didn't want to risk his personal net worth anymore. And so his criteria for an outside buyer was much different than the person who just wanted to cash out. And then when we talk about removing liabilities, we're working with a number of clients now who, for whatever reason, mostly because of the economic situation that we're seeing right now, have the business is in a bit of distress. And it's not to the point of bankruptcy, but there's a risk of that happening, and there is a deep concern on the part of the owners that if the business goes into bankruptcy or the bank forecloses on that business, that the bank, if the loan is structured in a way that they are personally liable for the money, the bank may come after their own personal net worth. So they want to make sure that they get that risk out from over their head by hopefully selling a business for a price that removes the loan liability from on their back. Okay, next slide. One of the overall points that I want to make through this presentation is that selling to an outside buyer is not a one-size-fits-all sort of a process, and the end goal should really dictate your course of action. If, for example, as I mentioned earlier, your goal is to sell for the most amount of money that you possibly can get and then just get out of the business, to pick one extreme example, generally the audience that you're going to be selling to is, in our world, what we call a strategic buyer, which most people would just refer to as simply competitors. Anybody else that happens to be in your business that might be a little bit larger or about the same size that may have an interest in getting into your market or gaining your customers or gaining assets or whatever it is that is attractive about your business. Generally, they will tend to pay more than other types of buyers. That's not always the case, but generally it is. And the things that you do to prepare yourself to sell to a strategic buyer and to focus on a strategic buyer may or may not be slightly different than if you're trying to find a financial buyer. And a financial buyer is generally much more appropriate if you're trying to find a partner to help you grow your business. In the example I used earlier, our client was still going to retain a minority share in his business, and he wanted to find a partner that could buy out the majority share of the business and also could provide capital to help him grow. And good examples of financial buyers are, there's been tons and tons of private equity firms that have sprung up over the last 5 to 10 years, and there is a whole bunch of them out there, and they are interested in all kinds of businesses. There's over 6,000 private equity firms in the U.S., and every one of them has a little bit of a different type of business that they're looking to buy. So targeting towards the right financial buyer is also very important. And just to give you maybe some more concrete examples of why you want the objective to be clear. In the example I used earlier about the electrical distribution company, his goal was to simply sell for the most possible money that he could get. We ended up having a difficult decision as to what buyer he should choose. There was one buyer who was offering a price that was very, very high, much higher than anybody else. There was another buyer that was offering a price that was good, but not nearly as high as the first. The buyer that was offering the lower price probably knew more about our client's business and had plans that our client believed in and thought made a whole lot of sense to help grow his business. The buyer that was offering more money, our client couldn't quite understand why he wanted to buy his company and was a little unclear about their motives. I mean, they were honest people, but he just didn't understand their strategy, and it didn't make sense to him. However, when the end goal was simply to maximize the money that you get, the buyer that was offering the most money, it sounds simple, but it often is not. The buyer that was offering the most money, it was clear that that was the direction for him to go. However, same situation, if our client's goal was to find a financial partner to help him grow and he was going to retain a minority stake in the business, he probably would have made a different decision, because the strategy going forward for the buyer that offered less money was something that resonated with him more so than the buyer that he ended up choosing, simply because of the money. But it sounds very simple, but if you don't have a clear objective in your head as to what you want to accomplish, a lot of times these decisions will weigh you down, and you'll end up perhaps making a poor decision because you don't have a clear idea of what your end goal is and why you're doing it. Okay. A key part of setting your objectives and setting your expectations, as I mentioned before, is making sure that you have a clear understanding of how your business is going to be valued the way it is, and also who is going to value your business in what way. And what I mean by that is that there are lots of different kinds of buyers out there, and they will all have a very different way of valuing your business. So understanding that it's important to understand that, I guess. Valuation and pricing are not the same. Pricing is heavily dependent on the type of transaction that you intend to undertake. The price that a strategic buyer is willing to pay, as I mentioned, is oftentimes very different from the price that a financial buyer or private equity firm is willing to pay, and that's often very different from the price that an individual investor might be willing to pay, and that is different from the price that an ESOP might be willing to pay. All very, very different types of transactions, and they will all price your company very differently, regardless of what the kind of intrinsic value of your business is. And it's very important as you go through attempting to put a value on your company that you use a trusted third party for guidance on both the valuation and the pricing. To give you an example of where expectations can cause a lot of difficulty, we worked with a client 3 years ago whose expectation for their business was, unfortunately, in our opinion, a little bit out of whack. They received an offer for $28 million for the company. Their expectation was that they should get $32 million. We had a number of difficult discussions trying to persuade them that that was probably a little bit too high for the time, but I mean, they are the client and that's where they ended up. Their expectation was at $32 million. They ended up declining the offer for $28 million. Now today their business is most likely worth anywhere from 12 to 15 million. Very dramatic difference, obviously. And were their expectations kind of appropriately set, they would have recognized that the 28 million was a good price and the risks that are associated with it, and probably made a different decision. Of course, it's easy to say that in hindsight, but I'm just trying to give an example of where it can make a very, very big difference in your decision making as to how appropriately the expectations are set.
Andy, a quick question.
Sure.
I talk to evaluators all the time about what they think their clients, what they think their business is worth. Mm-hmm. As a general rule, where the bulk of business owners, do they undervalue, overvalue, get it just about right?
Most business owners will overvalue their business. Okay. And there's actually, I don't want to get into a whole lot of technical jargon, but there's a pretty good reason for that. Most business owners are very, very comfortable with the risks that are associated with their business. And so in the valuation terminology, the discount rate that a business owner might apply to their own business will tend to be lower than the discount rate that an outside third party would apply to their business. And so because of a lower discount rate, if you do the mathematically, that translates into a higher valuation. So it's not necessarily irrational that an owner may value their business more than an outside party. It's something that needs to be brought up because it can affect the expectations.
Sure, because I've been operating under the assumption for years that that's in fact the case. They tend to overvalue, but then I had a couple evaluator friends of mine say that they think that their client, the average business owner gets it about right. So I just was wondering if, I was, for all those years, have been operating under false assumptions.
No, it's been our experience that in general they probably do tend to overvalue their business. Not always. I mean, it's probably like 70%, 30%.
Sure.
But that's been our experience as well.
Thank you.
And that's kind of a good transition into this topic, again, of valuation versus pricing. And I include this little chart just to try to bring out a visual. The intent of a valuation is really to give a business owner a sense of what is the intrinsic value of their business based on the fundamentals of the company, the fundamentals of the industry, and the fundamentals of the overall economic climate. Pricing is different from valuation. The decisions that a buyer makes, pricing decisions are very buyer specific. A strategic buyer values a company much different than an ESOP or an individual buyer or somebody who's buying a company out of liquidation. And by the way, these dots that you see roughly correspond in general with where valuations where prices tend to come out. But what I'm trying to demonstrate here with this chart is that a valuation may be kind of an aggregation of all of these different types of buyers, but every one of these buyers will have a different sort of a price. And what a valuation gives you, though, is a good frame of reference to understand that, on average, if my business is worth 10 and I get an offer for 8, then it probably doesn't make sense to accept that offer. If I get an offer for 12, then maybe it does make sense to accept it. But that's the real value in a valuation, is to appropriately establish the expectations for what your business is worth. It doesn't necessarily mean that that's what you should sell it for, but it certainly gives you a frame of reference. Okay, next important step is preparation. My slide is a little bit slow to click over.
Not moving for you? There.
Okay, here we go. Key points in preparation. And these first three can be done in any order. but they should be done, in my opinion. First of all, select an advisory team, and the key elements here are advisors that you trust. That's number one. It's got to be number one. There will be a whole lot of difficult decisions that need to be made during a transaction, and you need to be able to trust whoever it is that's helping you through the process. It certainly needs to be an attorney. Probably also needs to be an accountant, and in our opinion, definitely needs to be a mergers and acquisitions advisor as well. But trust is number one. Experience is number two. In the lower end of the middle market, transactions, like I said, between probably 5 and 10 and maybe 70 or 80 million dollars, experience in doing transactions of that size is probably as important as industry experience. As you get to transactions that are much larger, industry experience plays a bigger role. But experience is certainly a role. Experience is necessary no matter what. And then the speed and the responsiveness of your team. Time will kill all deals, and so you need to make sure that whoever you hire as your advisors are able to react and respond very, very quickly as things come up. Organized stakeholders. What I mean by stakeholders in this case are generally owners and in most cases board members. There could be others involved, key employees as well, but generally in our experience it's board members and owners and shareholders that are the primary stakeholders. The key thing here is that everybody on that stakeholder team should have a very clear idea of what they want to accomplish in the transaction, and everybody should agree on what they want to accomplish during the transaction. Again, during the process there will be a lot of difficult decisions, and as long as everybody has a clear idea as to what the goal is, then those decisions are able to be arrived at much more easily. If there are folks with differing agendas through the process, it will break up a deal. So it's really important to get any issues out on the table early on in the process. Organizing your internal team, it's important to gain a good understanding of who on the team, where it's appropriate, who is okay to know what's going on and who is not okay to know what's going on. There's a delicate balancing act there between who do I let in on this and who do I not let in on it, because too many people know and all of a sudden that can risk the quality of your business as you go forward, the day-to-day operations of your business. And if not enough people know, you as the business owner, the primary business owner, will become overwhelmed with the due diligence requests and the information requests, and it's generally way too much for one person to handle. Not always, but generally. So there's a little bit of a balancing act that goes on there. And it's important at this point to also note that confidentiality is extremely important, as you might guess, during the process of selling your business to an outside buyer. Whoever you use, generally attorneys and accountants are they're confidential by nature. A business broker, the quality of the secrecy, I guess, can vary dramatically. So again, it's always making sure that you trust whoever it is that you're working with, and making sure that they're doing things to keep your business confidential as they market it to prospective buyers. Let's see, organizing financial information. Buyers generally want as much information as you can possibly give to them. So if your financial systems are perhaps a little bit behind the times or unable to get you quality information quickly, it's important to update those financial systems as best you can. And then also, in conjunction with your CFO or controller and your accountant, making sure you've got all of the financial information that you need ready to go so you can be responsive to due diligence requests. And then conducting your own preemptive due diligence. A good M&A advisor and accountant and your legal advisors will all be helpful in this regard in making sure that you can address problems before you go to market. An example of this is a client that we had heard of prior to actually coming to us. they had gone to market to find a prospective buyer, and what they went through all kinds of energy and time and due diligence, only to find out after spending months and months and months in the process that they had a customer concentration issue with their business from the perspective of outside buyers. They had 2 customers that represented about 70 to 80% of their revenues. And so outside buyers got very, very scared of that situation. It's not uncommon, and there are ways you can mitigate it. But if you aren't able to address it up front, you've kind of poisoned the well when you approach prospective buyers. And so those things need to come out early so that you can address them proactively with a prospective buyer as opposed to responding and being defensive in the process.
Is it safe to say that a prospective buyer dislikes nothing more than surprises?
Yeah. That's exactly right. And they have a certain expectation that is set very early on in the process, and it is the job of a good advisor who's running the process to make sure that those expectations are set appropriately. And to the extent that they are not, and something differs from those expectations, you get buyers that get very, very nervous.
Sure. Real quickly, you mentioned brokers. Do I dare ask a broker question that I was thinking is, what is your general kind of feeling about your average business broker?
It'd be tempting to say something bad, but it just depends, and it's like folks in our world too, and M&A advisors and investment bankers. It really depends. A broker that's experienced with integrity can do a very, very good job, and there's a role for them in the greater marketplace, and that's generally in smaller transactions where the type of buyer isn't going to be an institutional buyer like another company or a private equity firm. It's going to be another individual buyer. And generally that falls into retail types of establishments, very small service businesses. Usually those are going to be bought by an individual investor who is probably going to then go to work within that particular business that they buy. And I don't think there's anybody that's better positioned than the brokers to service those sorts of clients. It's just making sure that whoever the broker you use is that you can trust them, that they're doing the best that they can to safeguard your confidentiality through the process.
Okay, great.
Let's see. One more kind of relative to organizing stakeholders point I want to make. We worked with a business who has just come to us, so I should say we're hoping to work with a business. For 2 years they've been trying to sell to an outside buyer, and the issue that they have had consistently is that one of their shareholders has a very long-term horizon of the business and thinks there's a lot of potential for growth and wants to be involved day to day. There is another shareholder who, for age reasons and a number of other reasons, wants out of the business. In a situation like that, they came up with a solution in their minds without talking to anybody that the best thing to do would be to sell to an outside buyer. Well, you've got conditions now that that make a transaction very, very difficult because there are 2 different kinds of expectations, and so anytime a buyer comes in with an offer, there's going to be one person who says it's not enough, there's going to be another person who says it's fine with me, and it just isn't going to work. So again, it's very, very important to make sure that everybody is on the same page beginning in the process. Now, Chris, do I need to kind of speed this up? I guess we got about 3 more slides. How much time do I have left?
I got about 13 minutes, so I think you got plenty of time.
Okay, great. In the marketing phase, general steps here: research potential buyers. That can come through industry research of who's out there. Most business owners have a very good idea of who their competitors are and who might be interested in buying them. That's a relatively easy process in most cases. The private equity firm research is a little bit more difficult, and that's where one of the values of an advisory firm comes into play. Is there are lots and lots of databases out there, unfortunately very expensive databases, but nonetheless that can help to locate the right kind of private equity buyers. And an advisor will not only help you locate the right kinds of private equity buyers from the standpoint of who would be interested in your business and your industry, but also the right kind of private equity buyers from the folks who are, from the standpoint of people who are good people to do business with and who have your business's interest at heart. Conduct market due diligence. Can save you a whole lot of time and money. Preliminary market due diligence will tell you in general what the price range that you can expect for your business is going to be. And if that's enough for you, then you can make the decision to go ahead and try to sell the business. If it's not enough, you know it's probably not worth your while to waste your time and try to sell it and get some pie-in-the-sky price, but to maybe wait until market conditions are a little bit better. And it is also important to conduct that preliminary market due diligence from the standpoint of understanding what is it about your business that is going to be interesting to an outside buyer. That way, when you do go to market, you know what is going to get their attention, and you know what types of things they don't care about, so that you can, number one, position your company in the right way to make sure that you're getting the right buyer's attention and optimizing the probability of a close. Next point is to create a marketing document. The key thing with a marketing document, or two key things here, is one, to make sure that you are drafting that document. The purpose of that document is to give any prospective buyer a high-level overview of your business, number one, a good sense of the financial information enclosed in the business, but not to necessarily give away the story. You don't want to give away confidential information that could be detrimental to you, but you do want to give them enough information that they feel comfortable at least understanding whether or not they want to move forward to give you an offer, or to say, no, we're going to pass on this one. And a good marketing document will minimize the administrative hassle of dealing with all kinds of due diligence requests. And that's one of the primary roles of the good marketing document, is to make sure that you, the business owner, are not overwhelmed with all kinds of due diligence questions and you're not able to run your day-to-day business. The marketing document should take care of most of that, and also should help a buyer filter out whether or not they're interested in purchasing your company. And qualify the serious buyers from the ones who are just sort of kicking tires. And then going out and proactively contacting prospective buyers is the next step, and making sure that they recognize that that you're for sale, and clarifying as to whether or not there's an interest there. And again, that's something that almost always needs to be done by an intermediary. If a business owner is going out and doing that themselves, you create an impression in the market by folks who are experienced that there's some desperation there, or you create an impression that that you're not interested in paying advisors, which generally translates into a much more difficult transaction. Doesn't always necessarily mean that's the case, but in most buyers' experience, that tends to be the case, and so they look at you with a little bit of a bias. A general structure that we see and is very common in the industry is, first of all, to send a prospective buyer what we call a teaser. And that's a one-page document that gives a very, very high-level summary of your business, enough for a potential buyer to say, yep, we're interested, or nope, we're not interested, and a whole chunk of folks that they're able to say whether or not they're interested right away. For the folks who are interested in going to the next step, then it's critical that they sign a non-disclosure agreement, and that's something obviously any attorney can help you with, to make sure that that the information that they receive after they've signed that agreement, they keep confidential. And if they don't keep confidential, you have some recourse against them to the extent that it may hurt you in the marketplace. And then finally, once they've signed that non-disclosure agreement, the next step is for them to be sent the marketing document that hopefully has been drafted in a way that's designed to get their attention and to give them good insights into your business. So the next slide here is relative to execution. And the critical part of executing a good transaction is to make sure that you're creating as much leverage as you can with prospective buyers. And a credible auction process, in my opinion, what that means is that it demonstrates, number one, that you, the seller, are serious, Anybody who buys businesses very often recognizes that there are a lot of sellers who aren't necessarily very serious about selling. And so they tend to be a little bit leery of dealing with that type of a seller because they're worried that they're going to put in a lot of effort, and at the last second the seller is just going to say, no, I've decided to go a different direction. So the fact that if you've done something that demonstrates your commitment to selling the business, that's a good indication for a buyer. A credible auction process also demonstrates that there are other interested parties in the process. And again, when you've hired an advisor, the message that communicates to the outside world is that that advisor is working to bring a number of other parties into the process. And so any prospective buyer is on alert that they're not going to be the only one in the process, and so they need to make sure that they're putting their best foot forward. And that goes into the other point I want to make, which is making sure that a credible process also establishes and works towards a timeline for completion. And to the extent that you're working towards a timeline, again, that communicates subtly to any buyer out there that you have other alternatives. And if there is no real timeline, then buyers will take their time and the deal can linger indefinitely, which eventually just means that it dies, a slow, painful death. And you definitely don't want that to happen. But outside the credible auction process, the three basic steps beyond the marketing is to receive an offer or an indication of interest from a prospective buyer. And generally what that does is to outline, well actually let me go to the next slide and we'll get into that a little bit more. But the elements of a good indication of interest are valuation range and the methodology used to arrive at that valuation, the financial structure of the proposed deal, the proposed ownership structure, the due diligence process that the buyer tends to utilize, and then their timetable for closing. Once that indication of interest has been sort of agreed to informally by both parties, this is not a binding legal document, but just more of a communication document, then the more formal letter of intent will be signed, and that will contain all of the above elements as well as any other major deal points. And a letter of intent really represents a commitment on the part of the buyer to go through to close. Now there's lots of reasons that a buyer could get out of actually closing, but it's a much more formal step, and it means that that buyer and the seller are kind of tied in, and they're in agreement that it's time to get to the closing of a deal. And then, yeah.
Stage, if they do, these generally put into the agreement? Or not quite yet at this stage?
I missed the first part of your question, sorry.
Sorry, at this letter of intent stage, should the buyer back out at that point, are there generally penalties put into the agreement, or not quite yet at this stage?
A good letter of intent will be crafted in such a way that there are going to be certain elements that the buyer or the seller can get out of if it comes to that. For example, in a lot of ways, there are some elements that are just like buying a house. There's in a lot of cases there's financing contingencies. So, you propose a letter of intent and you say that this is contingent on our ability to get bank financing, and if that falls through, then you're just out. But the fact that it's a legal document and there are limited ways that you can decide not to do it makes it a little bit more formal than a simple kind of offer.
Okay.
And then the purchase agreement is generally done, usually at the signing of the purchase agreement, generally is at the closing of the deal. And that should in very good detail outline the major elements of the deal, and that's pricing and ownership interests, and then the reps and warranties, which are basically the allocation of the risks that go along with the deal. And that's sort of, if any liabilities that may be out there, that how do those liabilities get allocated? Are those more appropriately allocated to the prior owner or to the next owner? And that gets into a lot of legal detail that is probably beyond the scope of this discussion. Okay, last slide. just a quick overview of, in general, there will be two different kinds of purchase agreements that you see when you're selling to an outside buyer. One is an asset purchase agreement, the other is a stock purchase agreement, and just as you may imagine, an asset purchase agreement means that you're simply buying the assets of the company, or the buyer is buying the assets of your company. And a stock purchase agreement means that the buyer is simply buying the stock of your company. The key point that I want to make here is that depending on the structure of your company, there can be some very serious tax ramifications to either one of those agreements. If your company is structured as an S corporation, in general, you can sell as an asset purchase agreement, or you can sell in a stock purchase agreement. That doesn't make much difference, and you're going to be treated the same from a tax point of view. From a buyer's perspective, they almost always, in the lower middle market, would prefer to do an asset purchase agreement. So buyers almost always want to do an asset purchase agreement, and the reason is that rids them of any potential liabilities that are associated with the company. Because if you're simply, from a legal standpoint, they're simply buying machinery and equipment and property and inventory and all that stuff, there's no liability that's associated with that. And so they feel much more comfortable in that sense. Now from an owner standpoint, the stock purchase agreement is generally better, because then they can, in a lot of cases, rid themselves of some of those liabilities. The other important tax point that I want to make, though, is if you are a C Corp, and you do and you sell your business via an asset purchase agreement, you will get taxed twice. The business will sell, and then there will be cash that comes into the corporation. That cash will get taxed at the corporate tax rate, and then that cash will then be distributed to you as the owner via a dividend, and it will get taxed as a dividend. So it's important that, as a general rule, it's almost always better to be an S Corp than it is a C Corp in the lower middle market. Now that's not always the case, and there are some exceptions there, but as a general rule, if you're selling, it's almost always better to be an S Corp than a C Corp, because there are serious tax consequences. And that's it. I mean, I'm happy to answer any questions that you guys have, and a lot of this maybe requires more detail with a particular advisor of yours, but maybe I'll just pause for any questions.
Okay, great. Do we have any questions out there?
This is Mel. I'd like to go back to the value issue that was originally the value pricing consideration.
Sure.
Isn't value 99.975% of the time an issue of a multiple of earnings?
Yes, but well, it is. Well, actually, maybe I would disagree with that. It's generally, as a convention, values are priced, or the convention is to express value as a multiple of earnings. Usually that multiple, though, is a shorthand way of doing a discounted cash flow analysis. And that tends to be where the value actually comes from. But it's articulated most often as a multiple of earnings. But just to give you an example, we worked with a client who is in the home products distribution business. They were being the outside buyer priced them as a multiple of their revenues, not as a multiple of earnings. And the reason being that they were going to simply basically pick up all of the customers from our client and then put them into their cost model. And the result was going to be that they knew exactly how much money they could make from that stream of revenues. So they were much more concerned with revenues than they were with profitability. And the price that they offered represented a multiple of like 27 times their earnings. But I mean, it was almost an absurdly high multiple, but the reason it was absurdly high was because they were more concerned with the revenues than they were with the earnings.
But they were gonna, excuse my crassness, but they were gonna kind of rape and pillage the company. The company would be, or the target company would be essentially irrecognizable in 6 months.
Yes, that's right. That's exactly right. Other than the brand name, that's right.
Thank you.
So I mean, hopefully that answered your question.
No. It was just. I mean, I do understand, the strategic buyer issue. My experience has been generally about 30% higher. The reason I asked the question really was on that on the slide that's now being shown, the fact that the valuation, the ESOP pricing is even lower than an individual buyer, and I found that somewhat disconcerting.
Yeah, and that slide is kind of a general rule of thumb, but it is certainly not scientific. I could probably point to some examples. Actually, I can point to a client we're working with now where the ESOP valuation is actually higher than the financial buyer valuation. I mean, this can vary pretty dramatically. Other than the liquidation buyer, that's always going to be low. But some of these can really vary depending on the specific situation.
Okay. Thank you very much. I appreciate it.
Sure.
Do we have any other questions? I have more of a comment than a question. I go back to the slide where it says planning and the established clear objectives. I think that's incredibly key. For example, I often get the question from business owners, how do I find the right advisors? And I think the good advisors are ones that help you to try to accomplish your objectives and your goals. I mean, you can literally find a bunch of people that can help you with putting together a legal document or putting together a deal. But the idea is to accomplish what you want to accomplish, and especially when you're talking to a sale to an outside buyer, when there's a lot of things that could get rolling that create a point of no return.
Yeah.
To make sure you're accomplishing what it is you really want to accomplish is incredibly important, I think.
Yeah.
And, I'll get off my soapbox, but I thought that was a really key point because once you start the ball rolling on an outside sale, it gets to a point where it's not always easy to stop in a sense.
Yeah, I mean, in a lot of ways during a transaction, you're kind of walking through the woods, and if you can look up and see a mountain and know that you're headed in the right direction, then you're in good shape. But if you're just kind of wandering, it's easy to get lost if you don't have some reference point that's guiding you.
Exactly. Well, thanks, Andy. Excellent presentation. A lot of good stuff in there, and I want to let everyone know that I am going to be putting the recording of this up on our website here shortly. So look for that. At this point, I'm going to say thank you. Have a great day. We have one more webinar remaining on Friday, and I hope you can come